And now let's talk about Taiwan. The US has issued a dire assessment. It believes China is preparing for war, that China is training, arming and rehearsing for a full-scale invasion. That's what US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has said.
That Xi has ordered his military to be capable of invading Taiwan by 2027. The PLA is building the military needed to do it.
In the Far East, as China stares down Taiwan with serious ambitions to claim that island as its own. Taiwan's military planners say American support, including weapons deals, are critical in fending off a potential Chinese attack.
And we begin with more detail on that much anticipated summit between the leaders of the US and China. The meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden has been happening virtually. It's just come to an end and is the latest attempt at easing tensions in what is arguably the most important bilateral relationship.
In a tense and escalating geopolitical standoff, the United States and China are once again at loggerheads, this time over the contested island of Taiwan. The situation, simmering for years, has recently intensified as both nations harden their rhetoric and increase their military posturing in the Indo-Pacific region. With Taiwan caught squarely in the middle, the prospect of a major conflict is no longer unthinkable. Over the weekend, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth delivered a blistering speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, labeling China as the single most destabilizing force in the Indo-Pacific. His words struck a global nerve. China is conducting military exercises not just as a show of strength, Hegseth said, but as rehearsals for a potential invasion of Taiwan. Hegseth's speech outlined growing concerns within the U.S. intelligence and defense communities. Surveillance data and satellite imagery have documented a surge in People's Liberation Army, PLA, naval activity, frequent incursions into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, and complex military exercises that closely mirror what experts believe could be an eventual attack plan. China's response was swift and unforgiving. In a statement issued by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Beijing condemned the speech as irresponsible, inflammatory, and deliberately provocative. Chinese officials reiterated their claim that Taiwan is an inseparable part of China and warned that any attempt to split the motherland would result in severe consequences. "Those who play with fire will perish by it," the statement read, echoing previous warnings issued during times of heightened US-Taiwan cooperation. The phrase has now become a chilling mantra in Chinese state media whenever Taiwan is discussed. At the heart of the dispute is Taiwan's status. The island, officially known as the Republic of China, has been self-governed since 1949 after Chinese nationalist forces retreated there following their defeat by the communists in the Chinese Civil War. Since then, Taiwan has evolved into a vibrant democracy and a global technological powerhouse, particularly in semiconductor manufacturing. Despite this, China views Taiwan as a renegade province that must be reunified with the mainland by force if necessary. The United States, while not officially recognizing Taiwan as a sovereign state, maintains a robust unofficial relationship and is bound by the Taiwan Relations Act to supply it with defensive weapons. In recent years, U.S. arms sales to Taiwan have increased, including advanced missile systems, drones, and coastal defense weaponry. U.S. warships regularly transit the Taiwan Strait, asserting what the Pentagon calls freedom of navigation operations. Each passage draws harsh rebukes from Beijing. The temperature has risen significantly since Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te took office. Lai, a staunch defender of Taiwanese sovereignty, has refused to accept the One China principle and has been vocal about Taiwan's democratic identity. His administration continues to strengthen ties with Washington and other democratic allies, including Japan and several European nations. President Lai's recent visit to the United States, while labeled unofficial, featured high-profile meetings with U.S. lawmakers and business leaders. In response, China launched a 3-day military exercise surrounding Taiwan, effectively encircling the island with warships, fighter jets, and drones. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense reported over 100 Chinese military aircraft crossing into its air defense identification zone during that period. Beijing's tactics go beyond traditional military maneuvers. Cyberattacks targeting Taiwanese infrastructure have surged. State-backed disinformation campaigns aim to sow discord among Taiwan's population and erode faith in democratic institutions. Some analysts have referred to this as a form of gray zone warfare, aggression that stops short of open conflict but undermines security and stability. Meanwhile, the Biden administration finds itself walking a tightrope. On one hand, it seeks to deter Chinese aggression and reassure allies of its commitment to regional security. On the other, it wants to avoid provoking a full-scale confrontation with a nuclear-armed superpower. Diplomatic efforts continue, but the mood in Washington is increasingly hawkish. Congress recently passed a bipartisan bill allocating an additional $10 billion in security assistance to Taiwan over the next 5 years. The legislation also calls for increased joint military training and the development of contingency plans in the event of a Chinese blockade or invasion. While the Pentagon has downplayed the likelihood of immediate conflict, it has acknowledged that the PLA is accelerating its preparations. U.S. Indo-Pacific Command has conducted its own military exercises with regional allies, including large-scale naval drills with Japan and Australia. In the private sector, the repercussions are being felt as well. Global tech firms are reassessing their reliance on Taiwanese semiconductors. Companies like Apple, Nvidia, and AMD are exploring options to diversify their supply chains in case of disruption. Any conflict over Taiwan would send shockwaves through global markets, particularly in electronics and consumer goods. China's economic leverage is also a factor. The US and China remain deeply intertwined through trade, investment, and supply chains. A conflict could derail years of economic cooperation and plunge the world into a financial crisis. Many economists warn that sanctions and counter-sanctions would cause severe disruptions in everything from electronics to rare earth minerals. International reaction to the rising tensions has been mixed. Japan and South Korea have expressed support for maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The European Union has been more cautious, urging dialogue and warning against any unilateral changes to the status quo. India, which has its own border disputes with China, has kept a close eye on developments. Strategic analysts in New Delhi see parallels between Taiwan and other territorial flashpoints in the region. Some believe that a Chinese move on Taiwan could embolden aggression elsewhere, making global unity essential in deterring unilateral actions. Beijing has shown little interest in compromise. In official speeches and media commentary, Chinese leaders have made it clear that reunification with Taiwan is a historical mission that cannot be delayed indefinitely. Some experts warn that the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party's founding in 2049 is seen by Chinese President Xi Jinping as a symbolic deadline to achieve this goal. Back in Taiwan, public sentiment is divided. While a majority supports maintaining the island's de facto independence, there is growing anxiety about the threat from the mainland. Military service, once seen as a burden, is now increasingly viewed as a patriotic duty. Taiwan recently extended its mandatory conscription period and increased defense spending by over 13%. Despite the tension, there are still calls for diplomacy. Former U.S. officials, including retired generals and ambassadors, have urged both sides to establish crisis communication hotlines and engage in regular military-to-military dialogue to avoid accidental conflict. In a recent panel discussion, former U.S. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster warned, "We cannot afford to be passive. Deterrence requires capability and will. The price of weakness is far greater than the cost of readiness." The global community now watches with bated breath. Every new statement, every naval deployment, and every arms deal is being scrutinized for what it might signal. While no one desires war, the margin for error is narrowing. Taiwan's fate may well determine the shape of the 21st century world order. Whether the region can avoid slipping into conflict, or whether a single misstep could trigger a cascade of devastation, remains one of the most urgent and precarious questions facing world leaders today.